Recently, Bungie released their newest expansion to Destiny 2 titled The Witch Queen, which ties up a years-old story thread that Guardians have been part of since the game's first major expansion, Forsaken. Players follow the story of the hive god of cunning, Savathun, and attempt to discover what led to her being blessed with the powers of the light, something that has been usable by players up to this point in the franchise. Now that one of our biggest enemies has the same powers as the Guardians, players will be facing bigger threats than they have ever seen. With tons of new weapons, a score of new abilities, and weapon crafting, players are given more options than ever to defeat the enemies of humanity, even forge some unlikely alliances along the way to make sure that the Witch Queen can't escape with the Guardian's biggest asset. Along the way, players also discover some things that can change the history of the franchise as it's been told before, and realize that maybe things might not be as simple as light versus darkness. Hey everyone, I'm Tallen, and I'm here today to present you with our review of the Witch Queen expansion for Destiny 2. The first thing that we must absolutely talk about is the campaign for the Witch Queen. Players are thrown right in as soon as they load up the expansion for the first time, and they are presented with the option of a normal campaign or a legendary campaign. Being a veteran of the series and someone who is easily bribed by the promise of more loot, I chose to play with my friends who I do a lot of Destiny endgame with. We all wanted to be raid ready, so we made sure that we finished the campaign out in order to secure the coveted 1520 armor set that meant our endgame power grind would be significantly shortened. This legendary campaign was no joke. The health and damage of enemies scales with the amount of teammates you have, so you have a serious challenge for the first time playing through. Never in a campaign in Destiny or Destiny 2 have I ever felt punished by making mistakes before. Here, you're pushed by Savathun's forces as well as other enemies, and they can easily get the better of you if you let your guard down for even a moment. On top of that, if you decide to play with a team of friends, you are limited with your revives, meaning everyone has to be on top of what they are doing and aware of where others are. One death can mean a team wipe if your teammates are somewhere where you can't reach them in the strict 30-second time limit you have to revive them. This caused us to wipe more times than we thought we'd ever see in this game, and really upped the amount of pressure you have of playing together against the onslaught of tough enemies you face. Speaking of enemies, the campaign introduces the Lucent Brood, a new faction of Hive that are followers of Savathun, and more importantly, the Lights. The Light has been presented in the series as something Guardians, the players, wield against the Minions of Darkness, the enemy factions. But now, one of the original enemies of the series has access to this power, and it creates a very interesting set of enemies that are incredibly powerful for players to contend with: the Hive Guardians. Hive Guardians are members of Savathun's brood who are imbued with the same types of abilities as the player, and they present a major challenge during the campaign playthrough. You might encounter a Hive Knight with a void power similar to a Sentinel Titanal, who will use a barricade and suppression grenades to slow down your advances and strip you of your powers. You might run into a Hive Wizard with powers similar to a Stormcaller Warlock, who casts a devastating lightning spells that can rip through your entire team with AoE effects. Or you might run into a Hive Acolyte that dodges and throws a huge blade barrage like a gunslinger hunter. These new enemies turn your own powers against you and even add more challenge to the legendary campaign. And their presence is always something that you and your team will prioritize when making your way through the campaign. Things will get even more complicated for you before you take them down. You have to make sure you neutralize their ghosts. That's right. Just like players, these new Hive Guardians have ghosts that will resurrect them if you can't deal the final blow to them directly. So, if you're not paying attention, one of these powerhouses can be resurrected while you're dealing with other enemies and take out your team. All the changes do a great job of keeping players on their toes and add a new level of depth to the combat throughout the campaign experience. Aside from the general difficulty, the changes of how the campaign is presented are phenomenal. The last few expansions have felt almost like they are padded by adding unnecessary side quests before you can actually make progression through the story. Beyond Light was especially guilty of this, with random things popping up throughout the campaign that made it so you had to go from one side of this enormous Europa map only to kill a specific enemy that spawns only in that region before returning back to the actual progress of the story. In Witch Queen, we don't get that here. Sure, there are times when you have to take a break to the hub area to speak with a character, but it feels more natural. You're working with the Vanguard to find out how Savathun got the light, so reporting your findings here feels right. But overall, the Witch Queen campaign feels like it's in constant motion. The story is quite possibly the high point of the series storytelling, with great care taken to show the player who Savathun is and exactly how she came to be in the position we find her in when the campaign starts. It's thought that Savathun might have stolen the light, which is something that the enemies of humanity have attempted before with no success. However, it's revealed near the end of the campaign that Savathun and her hive were gifted the light by the Traveler. the same entity that granted humanity its power to create the guardians that players control. This is a huge revelation and presented us with the idea that the Traveler is more complex with its generosity than we initially believed. But that's not even the most insane development in the story, because we also find out that near the end of the campaign, the Hive were tricked into giving themselves over to the darkness. Eons ago, the Traveler visited the original Hive homeworld and was going to grant them its power. However, the darkness didn't want the Traveler conscripting another faction into its war on the Traveler and the Light, so it wiped Savathun and her siblings' memories of the Traveler and seduced them to the dark side. Not by telling them the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, but pretty close. The darkness told them that they were doomed to perish under a celestial event that would rip their world apart, but by ingesting the larvae of some evil worms, their race could live forever. The only caveat being that they must feed the worms with an endless cycle of killing and dominating worlds. Finding out that the evil race that's been seen as a big bad of the series was merely pawns in a greater cosmic game was mind-blowing for most of the Destiny community. We've always been told in the lore that the Hive chose to embrace the deep to survive, and that they had no other options outside of the worms. Finding out that the original Hive were to be chosen by the Light and were tricked into submitting to the darkness is something that has changed how I viewed the story as a whole. Knowing that the Queen of Lies was birthed from a lie is something that changes the whole series, and the moment Savathun herself finds this out in the story was something that was presented perfectly. She is filled with the Justify's rage, but still tries to see her plan to abduct a Traveler and trap it in her throne world through, because she genuinely wants to protect the Traveler and the Light, despite being a servant of the darkness. It's even revealed in a post-story quest that Savathun led the darkness away from the Earth during the collapse, the event that initially crippled the Traveler and almost doomed humanity. The complexity of Savathun's character is incredible and makes for the most exciting, terrifying, and best character since Oryx, Savathun's brother and original king of the Hive, was presented to us way back in 2015's The Taken King expansion. The final cutscene of the story also introduces us to the Witness, the true master of the darkness that's been searching for the Traveler for millennia. The darkness has always been something of a formless entity that we as players are told to fight against and fear. Here, almost 8 years afterwards, we are finally able to see that the entity that's been working behind the scenes to destroy the Traveler and the universe as a whole. With a chillingly calm voice, what appears to be souls spewing from its head, and completely blank, emotionless eyes, the Witness has been in control of every faction that follows the darkness and is the manipulator of the events that have led to the fall of the Hive and almost the fall of humanity. As with every other Destiny expansion, Bungie presented us with a new battleground to explore in the form of Savathun's throne world. This new destination is where most of the campaign takes place, and it's also where players will spend a lot of their time with new activities to earn new rewards. There's a ton going on in this throne world, and just about every part of it is cool. You can upgrade your rank with a new NPC named Finch, a Hive Ghost who is defected and looks to work against the Lucent Hive and help the Vanguard. While ranking with Finch, you'll be able to unlock abilities that allow you to discover more secrets throughout the throne world. Some of these may unlock paths to new areas, or they might simply lead to a chest that you can grab a sweet new piece of loot from. You can also unlock a few new weapons and armor pieces unique to the throne world itself. There's a ton of secrets littered throughout the throne world for players to discover, and there seems to be a little more revealed each week, which lets dedicated players really sink their teeth into this new destination. Alongside the exploration, the throne world features a new endgame activity for you to farm loot and endgame materials from. The Wellspring sees groups of players either attacking or defending a Sacred Hive ritual spot in order to overthrow the boss there and secure the location for the Vanguard. The Wellspring sees players encountering hundreds of enemies and a boss with a set of mechanics, such as destroying some Hive Withers performing a ritual, or pushing against Scorn that are advancing on the central point of the Wellspring. Or you might want to do the weekly preservation mission, which has players play a modified version of the first encounter of the raid or weekly pinnacle reward. This activity is great for those who might be curious to see what a raid is like without the pressure of having to find a team and set a few hours aside to complete it. FYI, as a quick side note, if you want to join a clan, join the 5-9 Destiny clan. Link down in the description below. We do raids every week. Preservation also lets players unlock some really fantastic lore involving the final boss of the raid. Oh, that's right. We should probably talk about that. The high point of every Destiny expansion is the raid, and the release of the Witch Queen meant the release of a brand new raid, Vow of the Disciple. Vow is an incredible experience, and as someone who is able to complete it on contest mode, one of the high points of the raiding experience in Destiny. Vow starts off with a long path leading up to a pyramid ship where the players accompany a device that acts like a key to enter the raid itself. Players work together to defeat enemies and collect pickups called knowledge to power the device as it moves along its path. There are several stops where players need to defeat waves of enemies that spawn. This encounter is fairly simple and introduces the pervading darkness debuff that players will have to deal with throughout the entire raid. Once players reach the end of the path, they are granted entrance to a pyramid ship. Players visit one of these during the campaign, but this pyramid is home to a terrifying evil that Guardians have never seen before. After the entrance encounter, the fire team is challenged with the totem encounter, which introduces players to a set of symbols that they will be challenged to solve puzzles with throughout the entire rest of the raid. They need to match symbols presented to them in a center area to rooms on the outer walls. After going inside, they need to defeat powerful enemies to reveal more symbols, and then match them to one of the 3 totems around the center area. This encounter challenges the communication of the fire team and establishes that they will need to be able to quickly and effectively communicate these to each other. It also features a lot of area control of mobs that spawn as the players that don't run into the rooms must defend, aka the totems, from enemies that will attack, which will cause them to explode, wiping the entire team. It's a rather complex encounter, but it really tunes up your team for what's coming. The next major encounter features the first boss of the raid, the Caretaker. This encounter was an absolute nightmare on contest mode due to the players being underleveled and the boss's insanely large health pool. Nowadays, on normal difficulty, it's not so bad though. In this encounter, players need to stun the boss, defend a new set of totems, and run into a dark room to retrieve symbols that can be used to activate the totem, initiate the boss damage phase. Featuring 3 floors and a final stand, the Caretaker encounter really relies on 2 players who will run into the dark room, being able to efficiently communicate symbol locations with each other and the team's damage output as a whole. It's a rather fast-paced encounter with a boss that is legitimately scary the first time you encounter it. After the Caretaker is conquered, you move on to the Expedition encounter, which can be a run killer for teams that haven't mastered the communication aspect of the raid. Expedition is an extremely complicated encounter that requires all players juggling different relics that have a different power set. These relics need to be swapped between players, and it's the only encounter that absolutely needs every player involved in the process to succeed. Every other counter in all other raids has someone defending or being a basic ad clear, so they have a relatively easy job if they aren't super comfortable with the complex mechanics presented throughout certain raids. Here, however, each player is tasked with knowing where to go and what each relic will do in order to make sure the group succeeds. Each relic having a different ability means that dedicated teams might find the relic that works best for certain players, or they might choose to just play whatever comes their way if they are experienced enough in the encounter. This is my personal favorite encounter in the raid because it's extremely dynamic and it really lets your team flex its communication muscle. The final encounter is with the boss Rolk, Disciple of the Witness. This fight incorporates all the mechanics presented so far with the exception of the relics. With a 2-phase boss fight, players must first match symbols and dunk charged energy from the boss into one of the 6 pillars located around the room while defeating mobs and communicating the pillar that has the proper symbols. After that, everyone will ascend into Rolk's arena, where there are even more pillars to discharge energy into before getting the chance to actually damage the boss. This fight is quite possibly the best that Bungie has delivered for a raid final boss. Instead of a boss just sitting there, Rolk will chase down your group. He lunges with incredible speed and will initiate an AoE attack that will add stacks of pervading darkness debuff. Once they reach a stack of 10, they wipe. Every member here has to be sure that they are able to avoid the lunge and the AoE attack, while also making sure that the energy is discharged. Even if you manage that, you're tasked with then dealing with those same attacks while trying to damage Rolk, which is much harder than it sounds. Destiny players are used to standing in a buff zone and damaging a static boss, so this is something that when players first encountered it, really threw them through a loop. Rolk's whole fight is anime as hell, and it makes for one of the most fun encounters in any raid that Bungie has ever made. Vow is a great experience, and it's all about being able to communicate as any great raid should be. I've done the raid numerous times now with the 5 Man Gaming Destiny clan, and I'm amazed at how fresh and fun the raid still is a month after its release. Another fantastic addition to Destiny 2 comes in the form of new weapons and abilities that players get to play around with. Let's start with weapons. There are nearly 50 new legendary weapons added to the game with the release of the Witch Queen. Some of them being world drops like the Crate Auto Rifle or the community's favorite, the Funnel Web. These are rolling with new origin perks specific to the foundry that made each weapon. The Crate and the Funnel Web are viced weapons, which means that they have a trait that might refill a portion of their magazine by simply doing damage to any opponents. You might use a Raghill D made by the Hawk Foundation to do extra damage to vehicles such as tanks or turrets. Or you could love the Omelon Pulse Rifle, the Ogma PR6, to gain additional stability and handling to your weapons if you're above half a magazine. These foundries have all been present in Destiny since the first game, but they've been criminally underutilized until now. Having each weapon have its own perks and stats is one thing, but now having an extra benefit presented by who made the gun is a breath of fresh air. Alongside new foundry traits, we also have weapon crafting, meaning that you can literally make a gun of your own. If you get enough copies of a red outlined weapon, you can eventually unlock a pattern for certain weapons to craft your own. As you level your new weapon, you unlock perks from a set presented with each weapon, meaning that you'll get more powerful perks available to select the longer you use the gun. I'm personally aiming to level my Under Your Skin bow to get enhanced versions of Firmly Planted and Warm Up, so that I have a weapon that has all the benefits of having high damage output while negating the general weaknesses of a bow. The time it takes to draw the arrows. This applies to the weapons for the raid as well. To pair with the new bow, I'm working on unlocking the pattern for the submachine gun submission in order to have a close quarters pairing for Grandmaster Nightfalls when they arrive in a few weeks. Weapon crafting brings a new life to the weapon system, and it really allows for each player to make their own version of the gun, complete with stat bumps at certain levels and cosmetics that are unique to craftable weapons. But one of the coolest additions to the weapons is definitely the glaive, an all-in-one special weapon that shoots projectiles, can be used to hit enemies with a sweet melee combo, and can even put up a shield in front of players to secure a revive or defend a teammate from a powerful attack that might end them. Glaives are the first major weapon type introduced since bows that were all the way back in Forsaken, and they really nailed it with a powerful fantasy of these things, except the exotic ones. Bungie, please buff. But what about the new abilities? Witch Queen marked the arrival of Void 3.0, which is a complete revamp of the Void subclass for all three classes, which makes each class a powerhouse and adds some uniqueness, which gives players the ability to really experiment with build diversity. Personally, I've always been a Warlock main, so having the ability to use the Devour perk to keep myself alive and charging my grenades for massive damage is something I've always dreamed of. But being able to play on my Titan character and use my barricade to provide my entire team with an overshield in PvP while throwing out grenades that suppress everyone and make enemies volatile and take more damage has also been a blast. And when I'm feeling roguish, I might hop onto my Hunter to constantly go invisible and grab revives for my team during challenging raid encounters. Much like the Stasis classes, each Void subclass now has their own aspects specific to their class, and a dozen or so fragments that are shared between all classes. So while my Warlock can leech health from enemies as a class-specific Devour aspect is utilized, a Hunter might be able to do the same thing with an aspect that requires a little more setup but can't continue as quite as long. The new system has been amazing to work with and really helps bring life to the subclasses that Destiny community has wanted to interact for a number of years with. Along with that, there are also updates coming from the other original subclasses in the games like Arc and Solar. So keep an eye out for those in the upcoming seasons. I will say, however, one thing real quickly. While the subclass and the abilities have definitely been a fun thing to try out, unfortunately it has made some weapons feel a little underwhelming because you can just basically throw grenades and abilities out one after another. But that more has to do more with the difficulty and how Destiny as a game as a whole is currently right now after 7 years old. For Witch Queen though itself, absolutely amazing. As expansions go, Bungie has absolutely killed it with the Witch Queen. Everything presented to players in this expansion so far has really made for an almost entirely new Destiny experience from what players had before. Being able to craft your abilities for Void subclasses or actually crafting your own weapons is a phenomenal change that I honestly wish we'd gotten much earlier. The new Throne World destination is filled with beautiful sights and cryptic secrets, all underpinned with gothic elements that make it truly a sight in a game that has already had an incredible art and world design. And the new raid is an experience that I personally will never forget. The Battle of Rolk is something that players have wanted for a long time, and his backstory presented in the lore is some of the best that the writing team for Destiny has ever created. With hundreds, if not thousands of hours of content being made for players over the year, the Witch Queen is definitely a standout moment in the history of the Destiny franchise. Now, we just need to fix the actual main parts of the game that have been around for about 7 years now. If you want to hear more about that, make sure to follow us over on Twitch to catch us in our Destiny live streams, and maybe we'll do another video talking about it later down the road. It feels like Bungie, though, has finally found the magic formula for Destiny DLC after all these years. And as a player who particularly mains Destiny, I am now more excited than ever for the upcoming Lightfall and Final Shape expansions in the years to come. If we had to give a rating as an expansion for the Destiny franchise, the Witch Queen gets a solid 10 out of 10. But if you're looking for a rating as a product of its own, then we'll give it a 9 out of 10. Simply put, this kind of game isn't for everybody. But if you're a fan of looters or live service games and you don't play Destiny already, there is really no reason to not give the Witch Queen expansion a shot because it has never been better for the game. Again, some other things do need to be changed, which we'll get into a later video. Once again, I'm Tallen, and this has been the 5-9 Gaming Direct look at the Destiny 2 Witch Queen expansion. Are you a Destiny player? Don't forget, we have a 5-9 Gaming clan in the game, so you're more than welcome to join the strikes, raids, Crucible, or anything else the game might offer that you're interested in. We already have a good amount of members, and I can personally say from experience that these are some of the most fun times that we've had with other players. Again, make sure to leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe if you haven't been new for more awesome content, and we'll see everybody in the next one. Thank you so much for the awesome support. Johnny.